r/pettyrevenge church janitor exposes pastor hiding college fund money. The envelope in my hands was shaking, but not from the cold March air seeping through the church's old windows. Inside were bank statements that would destroy everything I thought I knew about Pastor Williams, the man who'd been my father, my guardian, my entire world since I was 7 years old. I'd only meant to grab the donation records to help with the monthly report. Simple janitor duties. Nothing more. But when I'd accidentally knocked over the filing cabinet drawer, papers scattered everywhere, and that's when I saw it. My name on a bank statement for an account I'd never opened. An account that showed deposits of $47,000 over the past 12 years, money that had supposedly been set aside for my college education. Money the congregation had sacrificed from their own tight budgets, believing they were helping an orphan kid build a future. The account balance showed $1,847. My hands were still trembling as I sat in the empty sanctuary, surrounded by the smell of lemon wood polish and the faint echo of Sunday's hymns. This was where Mrs. Henderson had announced her bake sale fundraiser for my education, working double shifts at the diner to contribute extra. Where old Mr. Peterson had quietly slipped me envelopes containing his Social Security money, whispering about how education was the only thing that could never be taken away from you. They'd been wrong about that last part. Pastor Williams had taken it anyway. I'd confronted him 3 days ago in his office, my voice cracking as I held up the bank statements. I'd expected shock, maybe an explanation about some accounting error. Instead, I got that smile, the same warm, paternal smile he'd given me 1,000 times before, followed by words that felt like ice water in my veins. Now son, you know how much I've sacrificed for you. Food, clothing, a roof over your head for 12 years. Did you think that came free? The congregation wanted to help you, and they did. They helped me take care of you. When I pressed harder, demanding to know where the rest of the money went, the smile disappeared. You'd better think very carefully about biting the hand that feeds you, Daniel. Without me, you're just another foster kid aging out of the system. You live in my house. You work at my church. Everything you have because of my generosity. Don't forget that. But he was wrong. Everything I had came from this congregation, these people who'd chosen to love me when they didn't have to. Mrs. Chen, who always made sure I had new clothes before each school year. The Williams family, no relation to the pastor, who taught me to drive in their beat-up Honda. All the families who'd included me in birthday parties, graduations, and Sunday dinners, making sure an orphan kid never felt alone. They'd trusted Pastor Williams to be their steward. They'd trusted him to care for me. He betrayed us all. I looked up at the pulpit where he'd stand this Sunday morning, delivering another sermon about honesty and righteousness to the 100+ people who still believed in his goodness. The same pulpit where he'd spoken at my parents' funeral, promising to watch over me like I was his own son. The laptop bag at my feet contained everything I needed, the bank statements, donation records, copies of receipts showing where chunks of my college fund had really gone. The church's old projector was already set up for this week's sermon slides. Sunday morning was 2 days away. Time to honor the people who truly raised me. The laptop screen's blue glow cast eerie shadows across the church office as I worked through the evidence for the 3rd time that night. It was Thursday, 2 a.m., and I'd been at this for hours. My eyes burned, but I couldn't stop. Every document I uncovered made the betrayal deeper. $2,300 to Prestige Golf Club annual membership fees. $4,100 to Sapphire Vacation Rentals, a week in Cabo that he told everyone was a spiritual retreat. $1,800 to Elite Gaming Systems, the fancy computer setup in his home office that he claimed was donated by an anonymous benefactor. The list went on. 12 years of my future, sold off piece by piece to fund his lifestyle. I jumped at the sound of keys jingling outside the office door. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scrambled to minimize the laptop screen and shove the papers under some hymnal orders. The doorknob turned just as I managed to grab a dust rag and pretend I was cleaning the filing cabinets. Daniel? What are you doing here so late? Pastor Williams stood in the doorway, his usually perfect silver hair disheveled, wearing a rumpled suit like he'd been out somewhere he shouldn't have been. His eyes immediately went to the laptop, then back to me. Something cold and calculating flickered across his face. Just catching up on some cleaning, I managed, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. You know how Mrs. Patterson gets if the office isn't spotless for the women's auxiliary meeting. He stepped closer, and I caught the faint smell of alcohol on his breath. Pastor Williams, the man who preached temperance every few months. Another lie to add to the collection. You've been spending a lot of late nights here lately. His tone was casual, but his eyes weren't. They were studying my face, searching for something. Everything all right, son? You seem troubled. The word son hit like a slap. 3 days ago, it would have warmed my heart. Now it made my stomach turn. I'm fine. Just trying to stay busy, you know. Keep my mind off college applications and stuff. Ah yes, college. He moved around the desk, getting closer to where I'd hidden the papers. Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. I think we need to be more realistic about your options. Community college might be a better fit. More affordable. Affordable. Right. Hard to afford university when your college fund had been turned into golf membership fees. The congregation's been so generous though, I said carefully, watching his reaction. All those years of donations. Surely there's enough saved up by now. Something shifted in his expression, just for a second, but I caught it. Fear. He knew that I knew. Well, raising a child is expensive, Daniel. Food, shelter, clothing, medical expenses, it all adds up. The congregation understood they were investing in your entire upbringing, not just tuition. Right. Of course. I forced a smile. I should probably get going. Early morning tomorrow. Actually, I think we should have that talk about your future now. Have a seat. It wasn't a request. Pastor Williams closed the office door behind him with a soft click, and suddenly the room felt very small. He settled into his leather chair, the expensive one that had appeared around the same time as a $1,200 charge from Executive Office Solutions in my college fund records. You see, Daniel, I've been thinking about your living situation. You'll be 19 soon, and it might be time for you to find your own place. Learn some independence. The message was clear: stop digging, or lose everything. I nodded and smiled, playing the grateful, obedient boy he expected me to be. But inside, my resolve was hardening like concrete. Sunday morning couldn't come fast enough. The next morning brought Mrs. Chen to the church with her usual Friday offering, fresh-baked cookies for the weekend volunteers and a gentle smile that could melt winter frost. I was replacing burnt-out bulbs in the fellowship hall when she found me, her weathered hands carrying a plate wrapped in her signature blue checkered cloth. "Daniel, sweetheart, you look tired. Are you eating enough?" If she only knew that my appetite had disappeared the moment I discovered where her hard-earned donations had really gone. Mrs. Chen worked at the textile factory, pulling 12-hour shifts, but she never missed a week contributing to my college fund. Last Christmas, she'd apologetically mentioned that her gift would be smaller because her arthritis medication had gone up in price. "I'm okay, Mrs. Chen. Just excited about college applications, you know." Her face lit up. "Oh, Pastor Williams told me the wonderful news. You have enough saved now for a full 4 years at State University. I'm so proud of you, honey. All of us are." My stomach dropped. He said that. Just yesterday. He was so happy, talking about how the congregation's investments in your future had finally paid off. Said you'll be getting your acceptance letter any day now and can start planning for the fall semester. The hallway seemed to tilt. Not only had Pastor Williams stolen my future, now he was actively lying to the congregation about it. They thought their mission was accomplished, their sacrifices had succeeded. Meanwhile, I couldn't even afford community college with what remained in that account. "Mrs. Chen," I started carefully, "did he mention anything specific about the fund? Like how much was saved?" "Oh, I don't need to know numbers, dear. I just trust that Pastor Williams has been a good steward of our donations. He's such an honorable man." She patted my cheek with her flour-dusted hand. "Your parents would be so proud of the man he's helped you become." The mention of my parents nearly broke my composure. I excused myself to the supply closet, where I stood among the cleaning chemicals and spare hymnals, trying not to punch the wall. My phone buzzed. A text from Pastor Williams: "Need to see you in my office. Now, asterisk." I found him sitting behind his desk, fingers steepled, wearing the expression he usually reserved for disciplining teenagers caught smoking behind the church. Spread across his desk were printouts, computer logs, timestamps, access records. "Care to explain why you were accessing the church's financial files at 2:47 a.m. on Tuesday?" My blood turned to ice. Of course. The church computer system logged everything. I'd been so focused on gathering evidence that I'd forgotten about digital footprints. I was updating the donation database. "You asked me to. Don't lie to me, Daniel." His voice cut through my excuse. "I know exactly which files you accessed. The question is, what do you plan to do with that information?" We stared at each other across the desk. 12 years of shared history, bedtime stories, little league games, homework help, birthday celebrations, all of it crumbling between us. "I plan to tell the truth," I said quietly. Pastor Williams leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since I'd known him, his mask completely dropped. The warm, paternal facade disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "The truth? The truth is that I saved you from a broken foster system. I gave you a family, a home, a purpose. And this is how you repay me. By trying to destroy everything I've built here. Everything you built with stolen money. Money that was donated to help you. And I did help you. Just not in the way those simple-minded people intended." He stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the parking lot where congregation members were already arriving for evening Bible study. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide, Daniel. Keep quiet, and we'll figure out community college together. Or speak up, and lose everything, your job, your home, and any chance at a future." He turned back to me with that familiar smile, but now it looked like a snake's grin. "Oh, and Daniel. I've already spoken to the bank. Close that college account. Move the remaining funds to cover administrative costs. Wouldn't want there to be any confusion about the numbers." The blood drained from my face. You can't just. "I can do whatever I want, Daniel. I'm the account administrator. Have been since you were 7. He pulled out a bank document, freshly printed, and slid it across the desk. "Account closed as of this morning. Final balance transferred to the church's general operating fund." My hands shook as I stared at the paper. Even the $1,847 was gone now. 12 years of donations, completely erased. Mrs. Chen's overtime shifts, Mr. Peterson's social security checks, the Henderson family's bake sale money, all of it vanished into Pastor Williams' slush fund with a few keystrokes. "You're insane if you think this will stop me from telling them." "Tell them what, exactly?" He sat back down, completely relaxed now, like he was discussing Sunday's weather forecast. "That their beloved pastor managed their donations responsibly. That he used the money to raise an ungrateful orphan who's now making wild accusations. I have the bank statements. The receipts. Everything. Do you?" His smile widened. "Because I just checked the filing cabinets. Seems like those documents have gone missing. Probably got mixed in with the recycling by mistake. You know how careless the janitorial staff can be." My heart stopped. The original documents, I'd left them in the filing cabinet when he'd surprised me last night. Of course he'd found them. Of course he destroyed them. I made copies. On the church computer. The one with the corrupted hard drive that'll need to be completely wiped and replaced. He gestured toward the laptop, which was now showing a blue screen of death. Such a shame. Technology can be so unreliable. The room was spinning. He'd thought of everything. 12 years of evidence, gone. The bank account, closed. Any paper trail that could expose him, eliminated. Even if you had proof, he continued, who do you think they'd believe? The respected pastor who's led this congregation for 15 years, or the troubled teenager with abandonment issues who's clearly having some kind of breakdown? They love me. They've known me since I was 7. They love the idea of you, Daniel. The sweet orphan boy they helped rescue. But love is conditional, and gratitude has an expiration date. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I'll tell them you've been stealing from the donation box. Skimming money for months. That when I confronted you about it, you tried to deflect by making crazy accusations about the college fund. No one would believe that. Wouldn't they? You have access to every room in this building. You work alone after hours. And you're about to age out of my care. People will understand that desperation can make teenagers do stupid things. His fingers drummed against the desk. I'll be the heartbroken father figure, devastated by your betrayal but trying to handle it quietly to protect your reputation. The worst part was that his story made sense. It was believable. More believable than a respected pastor stealing from an orphan's college fund. You have until Sunday morning, he said, standing up and straightening his tie. Make your choice. Accept community college and a quiet transition to independence, or lose everything and gain nothing. Because even if you try to expose me, you'll just be destroying your own credibility with wild accusations you can't prove. I stumbled out of his office on unsteady legs, my mind reeling. He was right about one thing, without evidence, it was his word against mine. The respected pastor versus the damaged foster kid. But as I walked through the fellowship hall, past Mrs. Chen's cookies and the photos of church families that lined the walls, I realized something he'd miscalculated. The church computer wasn't the only place I'd saved those files. And Sunday morning was still 2 days away. The USB drive felt like a lifeline as I pulled it from my backpack, hidden beneath my dorm-style bed in the church's tiny apartment above the fellowship hall. I'd copied everything to it Tuesday night, right after discovering the bank statements. Pastor Williams had been thorough in destroying the paper trail and corrupting the church computer, but he'd forgotten about my old laptop, the one Mrs. Patterson had donated when her grandson went off to college. My hands shook as I plugged in the drive and watched the files populate. Bank statements, receipts, deposit records, it was all there. 12 years of theft, documented in painful detail. Relief flooded through me until I opened the first file. Corrupted. I tried another. Same thing. Then another. Every single file was unreadable, showing nothing but garbled text and broken code. The USB drive had been damaged somehow, maybe from the moisture in my backpack or just cheap hardware finally failing at the worst possible moment. I slammed the laptop shut and buried my face in my hands. Pastor Williams had won. No evidence, no proof, no way to make anyone believe the truth. Just his word against mine, exactly like he'd planned. A soft knock on my apartment door made me freeze. It was almost 10 p.m., who would be visiting now? Daniel? It's Sarah Henderson. My stomach dropped. Sarah was Pastor Williams' daughter, a year younger than me, home from her freshman year at State University. The same university I was supposed to attend with my college fund. She'd grown up alongside me in this church, and we'd been close friends before she left for school. I opened the door to find her standing in the hallway, her expression troubled. Can we talk? It's important. She pushed past me into the small apartment, then turned around with an urgency I'd never seen from her before. Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Sarah, what's going on? My dad's been acting weird lately. Nervous. And yesterday I heard him on the phone with the bank, talking about closing accounts and transferring funds. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. He doesn't know I heard, but he mentioned your name. And something about making problems disappear. My heart started racing. What exactly did he say? He said the college fund situation was handled, and that you wouldn't be causing any more trouble. Her eyes searched my face. Daniel, what college fund situation? What kind of trouble? I stared at her, my mind spinning. Sarah Henderson, Pastor Williams wasn't her biological father. She was his stepdaughter, adopted when he married her mother 5 years ago. Her loyalty might not run as deep as his blood relatives. If I tell you something, do you promise to hear me out completely before you react? She nodded, settling onto my small couch. I promise. So I told her everything. The discovered bank statements, the missing money, the confrontation with her stepfather, his threats, the destroyed evidence. Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to horror as the story unfolded. That's impossible, she whispered when I finished. My dad would never, he's not that kind of person. I know how it sounds. I didn't want to believe it either. But Daniel, you don't have any proof now. Just your word against his. I know. I slumped forward, exhaustion hitting me like a wave. He thought of everything. Made sure I'd look like a troubled kid making false accusations. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, her expression had hardened with resolve. Actually, she said slowly, he might not have thought of everything. There's something you don't know about my stepfather. Something my mom made me promise never to tell anyone. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos until she found what she was looking for. Daniel, you're not his first victim. Sarah's phone screen showed a bank document that looked eerily familiar, another account statement with a name I didn't recognize, but the same pattern of deposits and withdrawals I'd seen in my own file. This is from 3 years ago, before Mom married him, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. The kid's name was Marcus Rivera. His parents died in a car accident when he was 10, and Pastor Williams took him in through the church's emergency placement program. My blood ran cold. What happened to him? He aged out at 18 and just disappeared. Dad said he was ungrateful, that he'd gotten involved with the wrong crowd and didn't want help anymore. But Mom found these documents when she was cleaning out Dad's old files. Sarah swiped to another photo. Look at the account balance when Marcus turned 18. $237. Out of what looked like over $30,000 in donations. There's more, Sarah continued, showing me copies of receipts. The same pattern. Money that was supposed to go to Marcus's future, but ended up paying for Dad's expenses. The golf membership, expensive dinners, even part of the down payment on his new car. My hands were trembling as I held her phone. Where's Marcus now? Can we contact him? That's the problem. Nobody knows. He left town right after his 18th birthday and never looked back. No forwarding address, no social media, nothing. It's like he wanted to erase every connection to this place. Sarah, why didn't your mom report this? Why didn't she say anything? Her face crumpled slightly. Because she found out about it after they were already married. And by then, Dad had convinced her that Marcus was troubled, that he'd probably made up stories about missing money to cover his own bad choices. He showed her documentation about Marcus getting into fights, skipping school, acting out. Sarah's voice grew bitter. Funny how those behavioral reports disappeared when I went looking for them last week. The room felt like it was closing in around me. Pastor Williams had done this before. Perfected his system with Marcus, then repeated it with me. How many others had there been? How many orphaned kids had he used to line his pockets while playing the saint to his congregation? But don't you see? Sarah grabbed my arm, her excitement cutting through the horror. This proves you're not crazy. It proves there's a pattern. Even without your original documents, we have Marcus's records. Records that your mom has kept secret for years. Records that Pastor Williams doesn't know exist. Exactly. He destroyed your evidence because he knew about it. But he has no idea Mom kept copies of Marcus's file. Sarah was already scrolling through her contacts. I can call her right now. She's been feeling guilty about staying quiet, especially after seeing how much the congregation loves you. I think she'll help. My mind was racing. It was past 10 p.m. on Friday night. The Sunday service was less than 40 hours away. Even if Sarah's mom agreed to help, would anyone believe that Pastor Williams had victimized 2 different foster kids? Or would it look like a coordinated attack from his own family? Sarah, there's something else you need to know. Your stepfather closed my college account this morning. Transferred the last of the money to the church's operating fund. Even if we expose what happened to Marcus, my money is still gone. Her face went pale. He can't just take money that was donated specifically for you. He can if he's the account administrator. And apparently, he has been since I was 7 years old. I stood up and started pacing the small room. That's probably what happened to Marcus too. Wait until they age out, then grab whatever's left and claim it was used for their care. But the congregation doesn't know that. They think your college fund is still intact. Sarah's eyes lit up with sudden understanding. Daniel, what if we don't just expose the theft? What if we expose the lie he told Mrs. Chin about you having enough money for 4 years at State University? I stopped pacing. What are you thinking? Sunday morning. During the service. What if we don't just show them the evidence about Marcus? What if we also reveal that he's been lying to them this week about your college fund being fully funded? Sarah was talking faster now, her excitement building. Mrs. Chen has been telling everyone the good news. Half the congregation probably thinks their mission is accomplished. Imagine their reaction when they find out not only was the money stolen, but he's been actively lying about it being recovered. It was brilliant and terrifying. Not just exposing the past theft, but the present deception. Showing the congregation that Pastor Williams was lying to their faces even now, letting them celebrate a success that didn't exist. Your mom would really help us. Let me call her. Sarah was already dialing. Mom. It's me. I'm at the church with Daniel, and we need to talk. It's about Pastor Williams and the foster kids. As Sarah explained the situation to her mother, I stared out the small apartment window at the parking lot below. Sunday morning would either bring justice or destroy what remained of my life in this town. But for the first time since discovering that bank statement, I wasn't facing it alone. The phone call with Sarah's mom lasted 2 hours, and by the end of it, my small apartment felt like a war room. Mrs. Henderson had agreed to meet us first thing Saturday morning with Marcus's files, but her voice carried a weight that made my stomach churn. There's something else, she'd said before hanging up. Something I never told Sarah. Marcus didn't just disappear after he turned 18. He tried to expose Pastor Williams first. Went to the church board, the congregation, even the local newspaper. No one believed him. Now, as Sarah and I sat surrounded by printed emails and bank records her mother had sent over, the full scope of Pastor Williams' manipulation was becoming clear. Marcus had been systematically discredited months before his 18th birthday. Reports of him stealing from other church members. Claims that he'd been caught with drugs on church property. A carefully constructed narrative that painted him as an unstable, ungrateful kid who couldn't be trusted. Look at this, Sarah said, holding up a printed email chain between Pastor Williams and the church board from 3 years ago. He started laying groundwork for Marcus's behavioral issues 6 months before Marcus even knew about the missing money. The emails were masterful character assassination. Concerned reports about Marcus becoming increasingly aggressive and paranoid. Requests for prayer regarding his troubling accusations against church leadership. Gentle suggestions that the congregation might want to prepare themselves for disappointing revelations about Marcus's true character. By the time Marcus tried to expose the theft, Pastor Williams had already convinced everyone that the boy was having a psychological breakdown. He's doing the same thing to me, I realized, scanning through the documents. The threats about me losing my housing, the suggestions that I'm becoming unstable. He's already started building the narrative. Sarah nodded grimly. And if we're not careful, Sunday morning will just look like another troubled foster kid having a breakdown, now with his manipulative girlfriend helping him attack her own stepfather. My phone buzzed with a text message. Pastor Williams, *, hope you've had time to think about our conversation. Remember, community college isn't such a bad option. Sleep well, son, *. The casual cruelty of that message, the fake concern, the threatening undertone masked as parental advice, made my hands clench into fists. But it also crystallized something important. Sarah, what if we're approaching this wrong? What if instead of trying to prove the theft happened, we focus on proving the lies he's telling right now? She looked up from the emails. What do you mean? Mrs. Chen thinks I have enough money for 4 years at State University. Pastor Williams told her that yesterday. But this morning, he closed the account and transferred the money to the church's operating fund. I pulled up the bank document on my laptop. What if we start with something simple and provable, the fact that he's lying to the congregation about my college fund existing? But he destroyed all your evidence. He destroyed evidence of the theft over 12 years. But the account closure happened yesterday. There might not have been enough time to cover those tracks completely. I was thinking out loud now, the plan forming as I spoke. What if we call the bank first thing Monday morning? Get a current statement showing the account is closed. Sarah was already shaking her head. Daniel, Sunday's service is tomorrow. We don't have until Monday. She was right. But something about the timeline was nagging at me. Pastor Williams had moved fast to destroy evidence and close the account, but maybe too fast. In his rush to eliminate the paper trail, he might have made mistakes. The church's financial records, I said suddenly. If he transferred the remaining money to the operating fund, there has to be a record of that deposit. He can't just make money appear in the church account without some kind of documentation. But how do we access those records? The church computer is corrupted, remember? I smiled for the first time in days. The church computer is corrupted. But Pastor Williams isn't the only one with access to the financial accounts. Mrs. Patterson has been the church treasurer for 15 years. She keeps her own records at home. Sarah's eyes widened. You think she'd help us? I think she'd help us verify what Pastor Williams told the congregation about my college fund. Especially if we frame it as making sure the donation records are accurate for tax purposes. I was already reaching for my phone. She's always been paranoid about keeping perfect books. If there's a discrepancy between what Pastor Williams claims and what the actual accounts show, she'll want to fix it immediately, Sarah finished. Even if it means questioning Pastor Williams directly. It wasn't a perfect plan. There were still a dozen ways it could backfire. But for the first time since this nightmare began, we had a path forward that didn't rely on convincing people to believe the unbelievable. We just had to survive until Sunday morning. Mrs. Patterson's house smelled like lavender and old books, the kind of place where financial records were kept in color-coded binders and every receipt was filed chronologically. She answered the door at 7 a.m. Saturday morning in her quilted robe, looking more curious than annoyed at our early visit. Daniel, Sarah, what brings you here so early? Is everything all right at the church? Sarah and I had rehearsed this conversation during our sleepless night. Keep it simple, focus on the discrepancy, let Mrs. Patterson's obsession with accurate bookkeeping do the heavy lifting. We're hoping you could help us verify some donation records, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There might be a discrepancy in my college fund documentation, and we want to make sure everything's accurate before the annual financial report. Mrs. Patterson's eyes immediately sharpened. In 15 years as church treasurer, she'd never had a financial discrepancy that couldn't be resolved within hours. What kind of discrepancy? Pastor Williams mentioned to Mrs. Chen that my college fund had reached the full amount needed for 4 years at State University, Sarah said carefully. But when Daniel tried to check the balance for planning purposes, he couldn't access the account information. Well, that's easily resolved. Come in, come in. Mrs. Patterson ushered us into her dining room, which doubled as a home office. File cabinets lined 2 walls, each drawer labeled with years and categories. I keep copies of all deposit records, of course. Let me pull your file, Daniel. She moved with practiced efficiency to a cabinet marked Special Funds 2015 to 2024 and withdrew a thick manila folder. My heart hammered as she spread the contents across her dining table, 12 years of donation records, deposit slips, and quarterly balance reports. Now let's see, according to my records, your fund should have approximately. She ran her finger down a column of numbers, her expression growing confused. That's odd. My last quarterly report shows $47,000 in total donations over 12 years, but the account balance as of December was only $1,847. Sarah and I exchanged glances. Mrs. Patterson was discovering the theft in real time, thinking she was just solving a bookkeeping error. Could there have been expenses withdrawn for Daniel's care? Sarah asked innocently. Maybe Pastor Williams has documentation we haven't seen. Mrs. Patterson shook her head firmly. Absolutely not. The congregation was very clear that these donations were specifically for education costs. Housing and care expenses come from the general operating fund. She pulled out another binder. I have the board meeting minutes where this was established. The college fund was never to be touched except for tuition, books, and related education expenses. She flipped through pages, her movements becoming more agitated. According to the bank statements Pastor Williams provides quarterly, there should be $45,153 remaining in that account. More than enough for 4 years at State University, just like he told Mrs. Chen. My phone buzzed. A text from Pastor Williams, *, good morning, Daniel. Looking forward to seeing you at service tomorrow. I trust you've made the right decision about our conversation, *. Mrs. Patterson, I said, my voice barely steady, what if those quarterly bank statements weren't accurate? What if the account actually had a much lower balance? She looked up from the papers, her face pale. That would mean either the bank made massive errors over multiple years, or... She trailed off, the implications sinking in. Or someone with account access was withdrawing money without reporting it, Sarah finished gently. The room fell silent except for the ticking of Mrs. Patterson's grandfather clock. I could see her mental calculations, her treasurer's mind working through possibilities and finding only one logical conclusion. We need to call the bank immediately, she said, reaching for her phone. If there are unauthorized withdrawals from a fund designated for your education, Daniel, that's theft. But as she dialed, my phone rang. Pastor Williams' number appeared on the screen. He knew we were here. I stared at Pastor Williams' name on my phone screen, my finger hovering over the decline button. Mrs. Patterson was already dialing the bank, her face set with the determined expression I'd seen her wear during budget meetings when the numbers didn't add up. Answer it, Sarah whispered. If you don't, he'll know something's wrong. I swiped to accept the call, putting it on speaker so they could hear. Daniel, son, I was hoping we could chat this morning. Are you at the church? I stopped by your apartment but didn't see you. Mrs. Patterson froze, the bank's hold music playing softly from her phone. We all understood the implication, he was looking for me, tracking my movements. I'm just running some errands in town, I managed. What did you need? Nothing urgent. Just wanted to make sure you were doing all right after our conversation yesterday. Sometimes these big life transitions can feel overwhelming. His tone was warm, paternal, but underneath I caught something else. Suspicion. You haven't been talking to anyone about our discussion, have you? Sometimes when people are stressed, they say things they don't really mean. Sarah's eyes went wide. He was fishing, trying to determine if I'd told anyone about the missing money. No, Pastor Williams. I've just been thinking about what you said. About community college being a good option. Excellent. I'm glad you're being practical about this. There was relief in his voice. Actually, I've been making some calls. There's a nice program at the technical college that starts in January. We should discuss it tomorrow after service. Mrs. Patterson had hung up with the bank and was frantically writing notes on a pad. She held it up for us to see. Bank confirms account closed Friday. Final balance $1,847 transferred to church operating fund. My blood turned to ice. The bank had confirmed what I already knew, but seeing Mrs. Patterson's shocked expression made it real in a new way. This wasn't just my word against Pastor Williams anymore, there was an official record of the account closure. That sounds great, I told him, fighting to keep my voice normal. I should probably let you go though. Like you said, I've got some thinking to do. Of course. Oh, and Daniel. I ran into Mrs. Patterson earlier this week. Lovely woman, but she does worry about the strangest things sometimes. Always seeing problems that aren't really there. His voice carried a subtle warning. I'd hate for her to get confused about church finances. She works so hard to keep everything organized. The threat was unmistakable. He knew exactly where we were and what we were doing. I understand, I said. Good boy. See you tomorrow. The call ended, leaving us in Mrs. Patterson's dining room with evidence of theft spread across the table and the clear knowledge that Pastor Williams was onto us. That man just threatened me, Mrs. Patterson said quietly, her face flushed with anger. In my 30 years as a church member, no one has ever suggested I don't know how to read financial records. Sarah leaned forward. Mrs. Patterson, we need to tell you something else. About what really happened to my stepfather's last foster child. But before she could continue, we heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Through the lace curtains, I could see Pastor Williams' black sedan parking behind my beat-up Honda. He'd found us. Back door, Mrs. Patterson whispered, already gathering the financial documents. Take these. I'll handle him. As the front doorbell rang, we slipped through her kitchen toward the rear exit, our evidence tucked into Sarah's backpack. But Pastor Williams had anticipated this move. Through the back window, I could see his car was positioned to block the driveway. We were trapped, and Sunday morning was less than 24 hours away. The back door was our only option, but Pastor Williams' car blocked any chance of escape. Through Mrs. Patterson's kitchen window, I watched him ring the front doorbell again, his posture relaxed and patient. He knew we were inside. The basement, Mrs. Patterson whispered, pointing toward a door beside her refrigerator. There's an old coal chute that leads to the alley behind my house. I haven't used it in years, but... Sarah was already moving toward the basement door when Mrs. Patterson's landline rang. The shrill sound cut through the kitchen like an alarm, and we all froze. Pastor Williams would expect her to answer. Mrs. Patterson always answered her phone. Go, she mouthed, pointing us toward the basement. I'll buy you time. I could hear her footsteps moving toward the front door as Sarah and I descended into the musty basement. Behind us, Mrs. Patterson's voice carried through the house, Pastor Williams. What a surprise. I was just organizing some old church records. The basement was a maze of storage boxes and forgotten furniture, lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. Sarah spotted the coal chute first, a metal slide that led up to a sidewalk-level door, probably installed when the house was built in the 1940s. Daniel, I don't think this has been opened in decades, Sarah whispered, examining the rusted handle. Above us, Pastor Williams' voice filtered through the floorboards. I was hoping to discuss the annual financial report with you. Make sure we're all on the same page before tomorrow's service. Mrs. Patterson's response was crisp, of course. Though I do have some questions about certain discrepancies I've discovered. The temperature in the basement seemed to drop. She wasn't going to back down. What kind of discrepancies? Pastor Williams asked, his tone shifting to something harder. Sarah had managed to force the coal chute handle, but the door was stuck. Decades of paint and rust had sealed it shut. I helped her push, both of us straining against the weight while trying to stay quiet. Well, for instance, Mrs. Patterson continued upstairs. I have records showing Daniel's college fund should contain over $45,000, but the bank confirms the account was closed Friday with a balance of only $1,800. The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Patterson, Pastor Williams said slowly, I think there's been some confusion about how that fund was managed. Perhaps we should sit down and review the documentation together. I'd like that very much. I have 12 years of donation records right here. My heart stopped. The documents were supposed to be with us, but in our rush to escape, we'd left some of them on her dining room table. Pastor Williams would see them, would know exactly what evidence we'd gathered. The coal chute door finally gave way with a grinding screech that echoed through the basement. Sarah and I both winced, certain the noise had carried upstairs. What was that? Pastor Williams asked. Oh, probably my old furnace. It makes all sorts of noises. Mrs. Patterson's voice remained steady, but I could hear the strain underneath. Now, about these donation records. Sarah squeezed through the coal chute opening first, emerging into the alley behind Mrs. Patterson's house. I followed, my jacket catching on the rusted metal edges. We were free, but Mrs. Patterson was still inside with Pastor Williams, surrounded by evidence that could destroy his carefully constructed lies. As we crouched in the alley, catching our breath, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Changed my mind about tomorrow. Too risky. Don't do anything stupid. Our last ally had just abandoned us. Mrs. Patterson was trapped inside with a desperate man who'd already proven he'd destroy anyone who threatened his secrets. And Sunday morning service was 16 hours away. The sound of raised voices drifted from Mrs. Patterson's house, and I realized our escape had come at a terrible price. The voices from Mrs. Patterson's house were getting louder, and through the thin basement window, I could see shadows moving in urgent, aggressive patterns. Sarah grabbed my arm, pulling me deeper into the alley between houses. We have to go back, I whispered. He's going to hurt her. Daniel, no. If we go back in there, we're just giving him 2 more people to threaten. Sarah's face was pale, but her voice was firm. Mrs. Patterson knew the risk when she told us to run. A car door slammed from the front of the house, followed by the sound of Pastor Williams' sedan starting up. Sarah and I pressed ourselves against the neighbor's fence as his headlights swept past the alley entrance. When the engine noise faded, we crept back toward Mrs. Patterson's house. The front door was standing wide open. Mrs. Patterson. I called softly as we approached through her backyard. No answer. The house felt wrong, too quiet, too still. We found her in the dining room, sitting in her chair with her hands folded, staring at the empty table where all the financial documents had been spread out just minutes before. Every piece of paper was gone. Are you okay? Sarah rushed to her side. What did he say? What did he do? Mrs. Patterson looked up with eyes that seemed to have aged years in the span of our escape. He explained everything. How difficult it's been raising Daniel. How expensive. How ungrateful some children can be when they don't understand the sacrifices made for them. My stomach dropped. Mrs. Patterson, you can't believe. He showed me receipts, Daniel. Grocery bills, medical expenses, clothing costs. 12 years of documentation proving how much money was spent on your care. Her voice was flat, mechanical. The congregation donated that money to help you, and it did help you. Just not in the way we originally intended. Sarah and I exchanged horrified glances. Somehow, in the span of 20 minutes, Pastor Williams had convinced a woman who'd been ready to expose him that she'd been wrong about everything. But what about the bank records? The account closure? A necessary administrative change. The remaining funds were moved to ensure proper oversight. Mrs. Patterson stood up slowly, moving like someone in a trance. Pastor Williams explained that you'd been having some difficulties adjusting to adulthood. That you'd gotten confused about how the fund worked. Mrs. Patterson, please. You saw the evidence yourself. The donations versus the account balance. I saw numbers I didn't understand fully. Pastor Williams helped clarify the situation. She walked to her front door and held it open. I think you should both go home now. It's been a very long day, and tomorrow is Sunday service. As we walked to my car, Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely get her seatbelt fastened. How did he do that? How did he completely flip her in 20 minutes? Because he's had 15 years to perfect this, I said, starting the engine with numb fingers. He knew exactly what documents to show her, exactly what story would make sense. And she wants to believe him. It's easier than accepting that she's been helping cover up theft for years. My phone buzzed with a text from Pastor Williams, * glad we could clear up the confusion with Mrs. Patterson. She's such a dedicated treasurer, hates when the books don't balance properly. See you bright and early tomorrow for service. We'll talk about technical college afterward, *. Sarah read the message over my shoulder. Daniel, he's completely isolated us. No evidence, no allies, no proof. Even if we stood up during service tomorrow and told everyone the truth, they'd see 2 teenagers making wild accusations against a respected pastor, backed up by nothing but our word. I pulled out of Mrs. Patterson's neighborhood, my mind racing. And Mrs. Patterson would probably stand up to defend him, explaining how she'd investigated our claims and found them baseless. So what do we do? Just give up. Let him win. I drove in silence for several blocks, watching families head out for Saturday evening activities, normal people living normal lives where trusted adults didn't steal from orphan children. The unfairness of it all settled in my chest like a weight I'd carry forever. No, I said finally. We don't give up. But we need to change our approach completely. What do you mean? I pulled into the church parking lot and stared up at the building that had been my home, my sanctuary, my entire world for 12 years. Tomorrow morning, it would either become the place where justice was finally served, or where Pastor Williams completed his destruction of my future. If we can't prove the theft happened, we make him prove the theft didn't happen. The church sanctuary looked different in the pre-dawn darkness of Sunday morning. Without the warm glow of stained glass windows and the comforting murmur of congregation members, it felt cold and hollow, like a stage waiting for the final act of a tragedy. Sarah and I had spent all night refining our plan, fueled by gas station coffee and desperation. If we couldn't prove Pastor Williams had stolen the money, we'd force him to prove he hadn't, publicly, in front of the entire congregation, with no time to prepare his usual smooth explanations. You sure about the timing? Sarah whispered as we made our way through the fellowship hall. She carried a manila envelope containing the few documents we'd managed to preserve, printouts of her mother's files about Marcus, bank routing numbers, donation receipts that predated Pastor Williams' cleanup efforts. Right after the offering collection, I confirmed, unlocking the door to the sanctuary with my janitor's keys. When he starts talking about stewardship and God's blessings. When everyone's thinking about generosity and trust. The church's old AV system was simple enough, a microphone connected to speakers throughout the building, controlled from a panel near the back pews. During my 3 years as janitor, I'd helped set up for dozens of presentations, youth group performances, and special services. I knew exactly which switches controlled what. But as we approached the sound booth, something felt wrong. The panel was already powered on, green lights glowing in the darkness. A piece of paper was taped to the microphone. Daniel, I thought you might try something like this. The sound system has been disconnected. The projection equipment has been removed for maintenance. Even if you interrupt the service, no one beyond the first few pews will hear you. Nice try, though. Pastor Williams *. My hands clenched into fists. He'd anticipated everything again, staying one step ahead of us just like he had with the financial records and Mrs. Patterson. He can't have thought of everything, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. There has to be something. The sound of a car pulling into the parking lot cut her off. Through the sanctuary windows, we could see headlights sweeping across the lot. Pastor Williams, arriving early to make his final preparations. Back exit, I whispered, but Sarah grabbed my arm. Wait. Look. She pointed toward the front of the sanctuary, where Pastor Williams' laptop was already set up for this morning's sermon. His computer. If he's been managing your college fund account online, there might still be browser history, saved passwords, something we could access. It was risky beyond belief. Pastor Williams would be inside the church within minutes, and if he caught us at his computer, there would be no explaining it away as confused teenagers. But the laptop represented our last chance at finding concrete proof. 5 minutes, I said. If we can't find anything in 5 minutes, we run. We crept toward the pulpit, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain it would echo through the empty sanctuary. Sarah pulled out her phone's flashlight and shielded it with her hand, creating just enough illumination to see the laptop screen. The computer was password protected, but Pastor Williams had made one crucial mistake. He'd left it logged into the church's email account. And there, in his sent folder from Friday afternoon, was a message that made my blood freeze. *2, First National Bank Customer Service. Account closure confirmation. Please confirm that all records related to the Daniel Morrison Education Fund, account number 47291, have been permanently deleted from your system per our conversation. This includes transaction histories, monthly statements, and any backup documentation. The account holder has requested complete privacy regarding his educational funding decisions, *. Sarah and I stared at the screen. Pastor Williams hadn't just closed my account and destroyed the evidence, he'd convinced the bank to permanently erase 12 years of transaction history. The front door of the church creaked open, followed by the sound of footsteps in the fellowship hall. He was inside. And we were trapped at his computer with evidence that proved he'd systematically destroyed every trace of his theft. The footsteps in the fellowship hall were getting closer, and Pastor Williams was humming, actually humming, like a man without a care in the world. Sarah frantically tried to forward the email to her own account, but the church's ancient internet connection was crawling at dial-up speeds. Come on, she whispered, watching the progress bar inch forward at an agonizing pace. I could hear Pastor Williams moving around in his office, probably gathering his sermon notes and coffee mug for the morning service. We had maybe 30 seconds before he entered the sanctuary and found us hunched over his laptop. The email finally sent just as his office door closed. Sarah slammed the laptop shut and we dove behind the front pews, pressing ourselves against the floor as Pastor Williams' whistling echoed through the sanctuary. Beautiful morning, isn't it? He called out, his voice carrying that familiar warmth that had once made me feel safe. Perfect weather for worship and new beginnings. He knew we were here. Somehow, he knew. Daniel, Sarah, you can come out now. I saw your car in the parking lot. His footsteps moved toward the pulpit, where his laptop waited. I have to admire your persistence, really. Most people would have given up by now. Sarah and I emerged from behind the pews, our hands raised slightly like criminals surrendering to police. Pastor Williams stood at his pulpit, looking every inch the benevolent spiritual leader in his perfectly pressed suit and gentle smile. Find anything interesting on my computer? He gestured toward the laptop. I certainly hope not, since that would constitute a federal crime. Accessing someone else's private communications, stealing confidential information, those are serious charges for two young people with bright futures ahead of them. We know about the bank records, Sarah said, her voice steadier than I felt. The permanent deletion request. That's not the action of an innocent man. Pastor Williams chuckled, a sound that used to comfort me during thunderstorms and nightmares. Now it made my skin crawl. That's the action of a man protecting a troubled young adult's privacy. Daniel asked me to handle the account closure discreetly. He was embarrassed about some poor financial decisions he'd made with his college money. His eyes met mine with mock sympathy. Gambling debts are nothing to be ashamed of, son. Many young people struggle with impulse control. The lie was so smooth, so believable, that for a moment I almost questioned my own memories. This was his genius, not just stealing money, but rewriting the entire narrative so convincingly that even the victims started to doubt themselves. That's not true, I said, but my voice came out weak, uncertain. Isn't it? Then how do you explain the online poker charges? The sports betting accounts? The cash withdrawals from casino ATMs? He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through what looked like bank statements. I tried to help you, Daniel. Tried to get you into counseling for your addiction. But you begged me not to tell the congregation. Said it would break their hearts to know their donated money had gone to feed your gambling problem. Sarah grabbed my arm. Daniel, don't listen to him. He's making this up. But Pastor Williams was already showing us the phone screen, and there they were, bank transactions that looked exactly like what he was describing. Charges to online gambling sites, casino withdrawals, sports betting accounts. All dated over the past 6 months, all tied to my college fund account. How? I whispered. Amazing what you can accomplish with online banking and a young man's social security number, Pastor Williams said, pocketing the phone. These records will show that Daniel Morrison developed a serious gambling addiction and blew through his college fund in a matter of months. When I tried to intervene, he became paranoid and started making wild accusations about theft. The sanctuary was filling with early arriving congregation members, their voices carrying from the fellowship hall as they gathered for coffee and fellowship before service. Normal people living normal lives, about to be fed another lie by a master manipulator. The service starts in 30 minutes, Pastor Williams continued, straightening his tie. You have until then to decide how this story ends. Accept the narrative I've created, troubled young man overcomes gambling addiction with help from caring pastor, or try to fight it and watch me destroy what's left of your credibility with evidence of your own crimes. He'd won again. Not only had he stolen my money and destroyed the evidence, he'd manufactured new evidence that painted me as the criminal. And I was starting to realize that Sunday morning might be my last chance to stop him from doing this to someone else. The congregation was filing into the sanctuary now, their familiar faces glowing with Sunday morning warmth. Mrs. Chen waved at me from the third pew, her smile radiant with pride for my fully funded college education. The Henderson family settled into their usual spot near the piano, Mrs. Henderson still believing she was protecting a secret that would help us. They had no idea they were about to witness either my complete destruction or Pastor Williams' final exposure. 30 minutes, Pastor Williams repeated, checking his watch. Though I should mention, I've already spoken to Sheriff Morrison about some concerning financial irregularities I discovered. Amazing coincidence that he shares your last name, isn't it, Daniel? He's very interested in discussing your gambling activities after service today. My blood turned to ice. Sheriff Morrison wasn't actually related to me, but he'd been one of the officers who'd handled my parents' accident 12 years ago. He'd always taken a protective interest in my welfare, checking in periodically to make sure I was adjusting well to life with Pastor Williams. Now Pastor Williams had poisoned that relationship too. You told him I was gambling. I told him I was concerned about a young man in my care who might be involved in some questionable financial activities. He's obligated to investigate, of course. Especially when there's potential fraud involved with church funds. Pastor Williams' smile widened. Federal investigators tend to be very thorough. They'll examine every transaction, every bank record, every digital footprint. And what they'll find is a clear pattern of gambling addiction and attempted cover-up. Sarah's face had gone completely pale. He's going to frame you for your own theft. The genius of it hit me like a physical blow. Pastor Williams hadn't just stolen my money, he created an elaborate digital trail that would convince law enforcement I'd stolen it myself. When investigators looked into the missing college fund, they'd find evidence of gambling addiction and conclude that Daniel Morrison had blown through his own education money, then tried to blame the church leadership. The beauty of it, Pastor Williams continued, is that everyone will want to believe this version of events. It's so much easier to accept that one troubled teenager made poor choices than to believe that their trusted spiritual leader betrayed them systematically. More congregation members were entering, including Mr. Peterson with his walker and a young Martinez family with their 3 small children. All the people who'd sacrificed to help an orphaned boy build a future, about to be told that their generosity had fed a gambling addiction instead. But here's what I'm truly curious about, Pastor Williams said, leaning against the pulpit with casual confidence. What exactly did you think would happen here this morning? Did you imagine standing up during my sermon and making dramatic accusations? Even if the sound system worked, even if anyone believed you, what was your endgame? I stared at him, realizing I didn't have an answer. Our plan had been built on hope and desperation, not strategy. We'd assumed that revealing the truth would be enough, that good people would naturally side with justice over lies. Because I'll tell you what would have happened, he continued. You would have looked like a mentally unstable young man having a breakdown during worship service. Sheriff Morrison would have had to arrest you for disturbing the peace, possibly for making false accusations against a church official. And when they investigated your claims, they'd find those gambling records. The 10-minute warning bell chimed, and Pastor Williams began arranging his sermon notes. Last chance, Daniel. Accept my help with your addiction recovery, and we can work together on community college applications. Or try to fight me, and spend the next few years explaining to federal investigators why you stole money from people who loved you. As the sanctuary filled with the people who'd shaped my entire world, I realized that telling the truth might destroy me completely. But letting Pastor Williams win would destroy them. The sanctuary was nearly full now, voices blending in the familiar pre-service murmur that had been the soundtrack of my childhood. Pastor Williams moved to the pulpit with practiced confidence, his sermon notes arranged just so, ready to deliver another performance of righteousness while his latest victim sat silently in the audience. But as I watched Mrs. Chen adjusting her reading glasses to better see the pulpit, something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about my stolen future or my destroyed reputation. It was about protecting everyone else in this room from the same betrayal. Sarah, I whispered, pulling out my phone. The email you forwarded from his computer. Can you access it right now? Yeah, but... Send it to everyone. Every church member whose email you have. Right now, during the opening hymn when everyone's looking at their phones anyway. Her eyes widened. Daniel, if we do this, there's no going back. He'll destroy you with those gambling records. He's going to destroy me anyway. At least this way, maybe we save the next kid. Pastor Williams stepped to the microphone as the organist began the opening hymn. His voice boomed through the sanctuary with that familiar warmth. Good morning, beloved congregation. What a blessed day to gather in worship and fellowship. Sarah was already typing frantically on her phone, forwarding the email to every church member in her contacts. I watched as screens began lighting up throughout the sanctuary, first a few, then more, as people received and began sharing the message. Before we begin this morning's service, Pastor Williams continued, I want to address a difficult situation that's come to my attention. Sometimes, those we care for most disappoint us in ways that test our Christian forgiveness. He was starting his narrative early, trying to get ahead of whatever we might reveal. But phones were buzzing throughout the congregation now, and I could see confusion spreading across familiar faces. Daniel Morrison, who many of you have watched grow up in this church, has been struggling with some serious personal challenges. Gambling addiction, unfortunately, and the poor financial decisions that come with it. Mrs. Chen's hand flew to her mouth. Mr. Peterson's face crumpled with concern. But other congregation members were staring at their phones, reading about permanently deleted bank records and privacy requests that made no sense if Pastor Williams was telling the truth. I stood up. That's a lie, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary. And everyone here can prove it. Pastor Williams' composure faltered for just a moment before he recovered. Daniel, please. This is difficult enough without. Check your phones, I called out to the congregation. Sarah Henderson just sent you an email from Pastor Williams' own computer. An email he sent Friday asking the bank to permanently delete all records of my college fund transactions. Ask yourselves why an innocent man would need to erase 12 years of evidence. The murmur that rose from the congregation was unlike anything I'd ever heard in this sanctuary. Voices of confusion, anger, and dawning realization as people read the damning email chain. Mrs. Patterson stood up from her usual pew, her face pale but determined. I need to say something. Yesterday, Pastor Williams convinced me that Daniel was confused about his college fund. But after reading this email, I realized I was the one being confused. A man who claims Daniel gambled away his college money has no reason to request permanent deletion of bank records. More phones were buzzing as the email spread beyond Sarah's contacts. Pastor Williams gripped the pulpit, his facade finally cracking. This is a coordinated attack by troubled individuals. Then prove it, Mrs. Chen called out, her voice sharp with authority I'd never heard from her before. Show us the gambling records. Show us the bank statements. Show us anything that proves this boy stole from his own future. The silence stretched taut as every eye in the sanctuary fixed on Pastor Williams. 12 years of manipulation, lies, and stolen trust, finally exposed in the place where he'd built his false reputation. He had no answer. No evidence. No more lies that could save him. Justice, it turned out, sounded like 100 voices demanding the truth all at once.